Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwikta.
Hey guys, this is Merps. Thanks for being here.
Today we have, the big news is that the Hearth Arena overlay has been previewed and announced. If you're interested in the arena, as you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, you want to go check that out. It's heartharena.com/overlay, or go to our YouTube channel for the YouTube video, which actually shows what the overlay is. And that's going to get released hopefully on October 1st or the week after. So it's coming very soon, and it basically puts Hearth Arena, which is the drafting companion we do on the website, into your game. And so you get like all the numbers and stuff, and all the advice just right in your game when it comes to the draft. We're not telling you what plays to make.
Yeah, so we released a preview video recently. It's also on the Hearthstone subreddit as well. If you haven't checked that out, you can check it out on our channel. We're very excited about it. Hopefully, by the time you hear this, the release will be quite soon. And yeah, we spent a lot of time on it, and just glad to see progress being made on this project.
Yeah. So we're not going to talk more about that. Instead, we're going to shift into the world of two drops. In today's deep fried meta, where we deep fry the meta, the topic is just all sorts of two drops, and we're going to try to do a pretty thorough coverage of the topic. I know the topics before were a little more general, a little more broad, because it kind of had to be when you're talking about how all the classes are balanced in the meta. But now we're going to go down into the weeds, into an issue that is faced by every single deck in every single game of the arena, which is what you do on turn 2. How do you make your deck work with two drops, and what two drops do when they get on the board? So let's start this off with the most important discussion of all: two threes or three twos. Which one is better?
All right. Any discussion of this has to begin all the way back in Classic, and we need to see the evolution of two threes versus three twos. So if you think back in Classic and also in Nax Ramus, because things didn't change much in Nax, three twos were the way to go. If you drafted a 2-3, that was because you had nothing better to pick. And if you had a choice between a 3-2 or a 2-3, you picked the 3-2 almost every single time. Even premium 2-3s, such as Imani Berserker, they were just okay. And the reason was because back then, three drops didn't exist as an independent drop. You had 4-3s and 3-3s. You didn't have spider tanks. You didn't have really like ogre brutes. You didn't have these quality three drops that really defined the three drop itself. You had awkward ones, right? Like Harvest Golem and Scar Crusader. Because of that reason, because of the weakness of three drops, you always wanted 3-2s. So in Classic and in Nax, your draft would be a lot of 3-2s at the 2 slot. You could kind of ditch the three drops and basically replace threes with twos, and then just go right into the 4 drops with the Yetis. So that was
Yeah,
the
so
way it was
what were the
before.
premium three drops back then, right? You had as the commons, what, Harvest Golem,
Yep, Crusader.
Crusader, yep.
Mhm. And that was
That's
pretty
kind
much
of it,
it.
right? Like Shattered Sun is fine as a three drop, but you're not like treating it when you're preparing for it. You're preparing more for how big the two drop can get, not like the body of the three drop.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, that was just two neutral cards and nothing else.
There was nothing else. And it's weird because if you think about how good the Yeti is, and the Yeti has always been good, it's still good. It's a 4-5 for 4 mana. And if you think about a 2-3 for 2 mana, that's the same distribution. So if you just go down this line, 2-3s should have been good. But because of this dynamic where threes were weak, you really wanted the 3-2s. And we've seen that change over time. With the introduction of things like legitimate three drops that'll just kill your two drop no matter what it is. Like three drops
Spider
should be
tank.
three drops should be stronger than twos. And because of the introduction of cards like Shielded Minibot as well, the bane of
Yeah.
many players' existence.
Yeah, so that's not a three drop, right? Two
No,
drop. Shielded Minibot is a two drop, but yeah, it's a paladin card. It's a class card. It gets seen a lot. Paladins get seen a lot, and just more and more since Classic. And it wrecks 3-2s, right? Like if you're facing a paladin, you kind of don't even want to drop that 3-2 on the board because you know it's just going to have the same effect as a hero power ping. That's
Yeah.
also a big factor. But I think one of the biggest factors in 2-3s never being all that good to begin with, going back in the conversation a bit, was that there weren't really 1-drops. The reason Yeti's so good is that it kills 3-drops, right? And a 2-3 kills 1-drops. It kills 2-1s, it kills 1-2s. Doesn't matter what the stat distribution, it's just going to kill it. And no one played any 1-drops. And if it did, it was a 1-drop like a Worgen Infiltrator or a Argent Squire that doesn't quite fit that mode. Argent Squire actually kind of, but you still need to hit it twice. And the Worgen will just get stealthed. Like, no one played a Murloc Raider or a Leper Gnome.
No,
Yeah.
no one did. Back then, classic, and it's crazy now because right now, when we think of curve, 1-drops are actually important. But back then, no one drafted 1-drops. The game began on 2. You just wasted that mana on 1, and that's absolutely fine. The game was so slow that you couldn't afford to draft a 1, even a premium 1-drop like a Abusive Sergeant. The thinking was that, sure, you could get value out of it, but the body was so weak that it would just get pinged down anyways. And that's definitely not the case now. Abusive Sergeant is quite a good card. You want to grab board control, and even if it gets pinged down, we think about the tempo advantage that you gain. And tempo was, it always existed, but it was such a card advantage meta, and it was such a slow meta that 1-drops were heavily frowned upon.
Yeah, because you do lose a card, right? No matter how good the Abusive Sergeant is as a card, it's still a 1-mana card. And back in Classic, 1-mana cards were just, you lose a card. So your opponent has one more card. So it goes into the late game and your opponent wins by having one more card than you to start. Like, that 1-drop has to do so much to make up for its value. And obviously now we're in more of a flexible meta where you can get faster decks, you can get slower decks, so everything kind of works. And it's really a lot better than it was before, a lot more diverse. And that affects, again, the 2-3s, right? And 3-2s in terms of how good they are coming down on turn 2. But let's, so far, I think we've covered the reasons why 2-3s and 3-2s are pretty much the same now when you're going into a 3-drop, and that 2-3s have some advantages when either you see a 1-drop to begin with, or when you see a Shielded Minibot, which happens a lot. So, are 2-3s better than 3-2s?
I think we've definitely trended towards that a little bit. You have kind of these cards, especially in turn 3, that aren't exactly just solid drops, right? Not like Ogre Brutes anymore. You have stuff like Argent Horse Rider, you have stuff like Silent Knight. And we're starting to get to the point where, starting from turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, there's a lot more interaction, there's a lot more stuff going on than previously. So because there's a lot more stuff going on, more minion interaction, that extra health matters a lot. And the fact that the 3-2 is just so easily dominated by quite a few things. We talked about Shielded Mini, but another thing is rogues have backstab. And if you put out a 2-3 and they backstab it, at least they have to spend that 2 mana on their hero power to get rid of it. And they can't just backstab and then immediately flip the board on turn 2 by dropping their own 2-drop. So I know some other streamers.
Yeah, like if you think about that kind of flip, that's a 100% mana flip. You spend 2 mana, they spend 2 mana, they remove your 2 mana, and a lot of people like to think in terms of like raw tempo, like, oh, that's just removing 2 tempo from the board. But because you have a mana limitation, when you're flipping the board, you're really looking at what percentage of the existing mana that people have you're actually flipping. So that, like, backstab is devastating when it comes to tempo that early. It, like, locks down the board for you, and they really have to do some crazy things to get back on it from just that point forward.
Yeah, I think it's definitely trending that way, and it really depends on what they put out during the next expansion, potentially. But with the addition of stuff like Argent Horse Rider and Silent Knight, and these kind of small, kind of techie, value-oriented 3-drops, not just like a big, solid body, with the more introduction of these, perhaps 2-3s will be better, because that you're giving more importance to that 1 extra health, and then the 2 attack really doesn't matter. It's enough, right? It's enough for the early game.
Yeah, and just to bolster that argument a little more as well, there, in terms of something like a mass removal that you may be playing around, Swipe Hero Power gets rid of 2 health, Consecration gets rid of 2 health, Holy Nova gets rid of 2 health. The only thing that gets rid of 3 health is Hellfire, and that's it's a lot less often seen, right? And then you also factor in some rares like Starfall, like Blizzard, and you're just getting more and more, or like a Mage Arcane Explosion Ping, like an Abomination. There's just a lot more ways you can get rid of 2 health on the board than 3 health, even besides the more commonly seen ways. So it is a lot more vulnerable to have a 3-2. And so, are you settled? Are you down with the conclusion that now in TGT, 2-3s are better than 3-2s? I know in our tier list we have Croc and Raptor as both a 52. Croc is not any higher.
No, I'm still not sold on it yet. I know some people are. I think there are times in which the extra attack really does matter, right? Later on in the game, a lot more times you just want the extra attack. Sometimes on turn two, you put down a 3-2 and they don't have anything except a weak three. And it might be a weak three just because of circumstance. Silverhand Regent is a good three, but later on in the game, but sometimes they only have that. They might have a Raging Worgen. They'll drop that, and you gain that small advantage that way as well. A lot of it really depends on just what happens with your opponent's hand. I would say 2-3s are definitely better against Paladins on turn two. And I would say they're also better against Rogue, but it's not enough for me to say definitively, yes, draft that 2-3 over the 3-2 yet.
Yeah, I think we can definitively make a statement, which is that, and you're not only against those 2 classes, right? Shaman with Stormforge Axe against the 3-2 is devastating also. What I'm more concerned with, and why I think 3-2s and 2-3s are still about the same, is that, like what you said before, the 3-2 is better in the late game. How often in the late game do you have no ways to play around a Consecration or anything like that, except to, like, drop other small minions and you really want that 2-3. That 1 extra damage is so important when the health matters basically 0.
Yeah.
Against the mage, they could ping it down in 2 turns if they're playing really slow, but you at least get some face damage in. It's not the best situation, whereas a 2-drop does stay on the board, but you'll get less face damage in. And if you're facing a mage, you're probably losing out on the whole board advantage thing anyway, so you do want to get that damage too. And even more than that, the way people think about 2-drops often, and it's kind of the way we call it, right? We call it a 2-drop. That feels like very like you're playing it on turn 2. But most 2-mana cards that are either 3-2s or 3-2s are not played on turn 2. Most of them, you draw them either later, or you end up with 2 of them in your hand in the beginning and you're going first, and you just don't play the other one for a while. Most of them, like something like 60%, a little over 60%, are played after turn 2. And so then you're looking at these small advantages 3-2s have over 2-3s. Because 2-3s, I do think, have significant advantages over 3-2s on turn 2. I think we're all very sold on that. But it happens on a much, not a much, but like a somewhat more significantly infrequent basis that that the 3-2s do have their values even out eventually.
Yeah, and like I said, I think we're at the point where one expansion can definitely tilt us one way or the other, right? It's definitely tilting towards 2-3s. That's just been the way that it's been trending since Classic. In Classic, you obviously wanted the 3-2s. Next came out, Dark Cultist arrived for Priests, and 3-2s against the Priests were suddenly not as good. And then it slowly trended, and then GVG came out, and suddenly the dominance of 3-2 was gone.
It's just gone.
Yeah.
There was an argument for a while that 2-3s were like actually just better than 3-2s, period, in the beginning of GVG because it was so fast. But just play on that. I don't think TGT was actually bad for 3-2s. You talk about Silent Knight, you talk about Argent Horse Rider, that's all true. Those are awful for 3-2s. But I want to talk about less shielded minibots, dilution. I want to talk about less Stormforge axes. I want to talk about, what else do we say was screwing over 3-2s?
1-drops.
1-drops,
well.
right? We also do see less 2-1s being played in the meta. They're still there, but there's less of them. And when there are 1-drops, right? The only semi-legitimate 1-drop that got added was the 1-mana jousting guy. God, I hate jousting so much I can't even remember the term. The jousting guy that could become a 2-3 depending on whether you win or lose the joust.
Yeah, that guy, well, first of all, playing that card is just kind of like 50-50. You either have a terrible 1-drop or you have Zombie Chow, one of the best cards in Arena. Um,
Yeah, but more than that, it's either a 2-3 or it's a 1-2. Regardless, your 3-2 is going to be able to take care of it. That's almost the same as a 2-3. So it doesn't actually hurt 3-2s compared to 2-3s. So I think overall it kind of balances it out with the two more popular 3-drops that are coming out. That have come out.
yeah, I think it's good. The game is at a healthy point right now, right? Because a lot of us think that the game really begins on turn two. If you miss your one drop, you're just missing out on an opportunity, right? I still tend to think of having a one drop and being able to drop it as kind of a bonus, as not absolutely necessary. But if you miss your two, you've just wasted a huge
Yeah.
unnecessary drop. That's when the game actually begins. The game begins on two, and the game really starts getting interesting on turn four and turn five when you have the option of either playing two cards or just one card, and then interactions really start to take effect. But yeah, this is why we're talking about 2-3s versus 3-2s. I mean, it's this stat distribution is so important because it sets up the way that the game is started. And like the backstab interaction with Rogue, you can play on turn two, and then on turn two already be losing like a
Yeah.
100% board flip. You had the
Yeah.
initiative, and you could have lost it. So it's a very small but a very important interaction on the first turn of the game.
And like we talked about before, it shifts so much by cards. Like you rarely see us talk about very specific cards when we're talking generalities in the meta. But when you start getting really granular into the stat distributions, like each card makes a huge difference. We talk about shielded minibot a lot, even though it's just one card for one class, because that really was almost the death knell for 3-2s in GVG. And we talk about all these different 3-drops because that's what follows the 2-drops. And if Blizzard just adds like 2 or 3 3-drops that are different or changes something else in the next expansion, it could totally flip. This is one of the most fluid parts in the arena metagame, I think, the 2-3-3-2 arguments. And you always have people on both sides. I know people who thought 2-3s were totally fine, even in Classic. And I know people, like, these are very good Infinite players. And I know people who thought that they were not playable. Like, they would take almost any card over a 2-3 because it would just be a dead card for so frequently. And part of that, and I think a lot of people will want to know the answer to this. So what's your take on ping classes versus non-ping classes when it comes to the efficacy of 2-3s? Because a lot of people hate putting out a 2-3 to a 2-3 when you don't have a ping and your opponent does. Because they think, well, my opponent is going to now get a card on me, right? They're going to attack in, they're going to use their hero power. Now they have a 2-1 on the board, and I have nothing, and I have no way to get rid of that 2-1.
I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, when we talk about plays that like trap plays as well, right? The ping on turn two or the ping on turn three, a lot of the times you're very happy with it, and it's a trap play for the other side. Because what happens if it's your 2-3 going up against another 2-3 and the opponent attacks in and pings? They get rid of your 2-drop, fine, but they essentially played a 1-drop, right? Now they have a 2-1 on their side, and
Yep.
suddenly you're on turn three, and whatever you play will dominate that 2-1. So you've already gained that advantage. And especially if you are a non-ping class, like what we're talking about, you actually like that because
Yeah.
if you're not able to ping, then you need the board to help you dictate because you don't have that ping to help you
Yeah,
edge
otherwise you
out.
don't have the initiative. Or like you may from your hand, but it's more iffy when you're in an arena and you're drafting. For the most
Right.
part, you want to be on the board if you can't ping.
Right, exactly. So that is great for you. And a lot of the times you will actually see infinite players try to set up and try to bait the other player
Yeah.
into a turn three ping as well.
But even a turn 2 ping, right? Your opponent coins out a 2-3, you drop a 2-3, your opponent is a mage, hero powers, throws it in, and you think, oh, well, now this is bad. He didn't even play off curve or anything. You have to think of the coin not as like a free card. But what is a coin but half of an innervate? So it's half of a pretty good card. So the mage hasn't gotten one card advantage on you by doing that. The mage got like half a card's card advantage, and it's half of a 0 mana card's worth of card advantage. So it's like a really, 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 really tiny bit of card advantage on you, and you have the tempo. So yes, the mage does have cards on you, and they have a decent board, but you're going to put the 3-drop down. You're going to establish that you're fighting back and forth between the board, and they've used their resource of the coin. So
Right. anytime your opponent uses the coin, you should expect to be behind.
Hmm.
If the coin is used properly, it should gain them the advantage on that turn. And that's the drawback with the coin, right? It's supposed to push you ahead for that one turn. And then for all other turns, you're going to be behind, which is the weakness of the coin as well. You get to choose when you get to kind of ramp up and accelerate and push this small advantage. But then the turns before that and the turns after that, you're going to lose that advantage. And it's up to you how you can sort of keep what you gained during that coin turn.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So I think we covered 2 3s, 3 2s pretty well because we just want to give you, like, we can go down every class, right? But I really don't think it matters that much. A lot of people have these theories in which, oh, 2 3 is better for this class or 3 2s are better for this class.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very iffy to say that. Like, the only time you may actually want to do the 2 3 3 2, the 2 3 2 3 trade with the hero power is if you're rogue. That's like possibly the only time. But in that case, you're still missing out on all of your rogue synergies with the hero power because now you've used up a charge of your hero power. And yeah, you have 3 damage on the board. That's very good. But you've used up some face stuff. You don't get to pull out your combos. And rogues are all about that early combo, right? So. Yeah. It's kind of iffy. Defias followed up by that is a different play, and that's fine. But like Rogue does all sorts of crazy things. With other classes, I don't think there's a huge difference. That's why we're not going to go down into it. But now that you have like the framework of how to think about these, right? Of late game, early game, you can also kind of piece your draft together. And one thing that's almost always true is if you're coining a 2-drop out and you're following it with another 2-drop, you coin out the 2-3 out first.
Yes.
Except, actually, no, just pretty much always. Except maybe if you're against Paladin, you coin out the 3-2 if you're afraid of Argent Protector. But then there's a Shielded Mini, so you're really not going to do that. So I just off the top of my head, I can't think of any situation where you would coin out a 3-2 before a 2-3.
It's usually always a 2-3.
Yeah, but maybe there is. I don't know. Just if you want a rule of thumb, right? 2-3 before 3-2.
Yep.
And this will bring us to the more interesting discussion, I think. Probably less useful, but more interesting. 1/4s. 1/4s, and not 3-mana 1/4s. There's a lot of 3-mana 1/4s out there. But let's talk about 2-mana 1/4s, which you don't see a lot. What are they? Narubar Weblord's one of them. Mistress of Pain. Mm-hmm. That new priest card, Wormrest Agent, is one.
Yep. Well, without the dragon. With the dragon, it's
no, without
really
the dragon.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so 1/4s are not seen very often, and this is why it did not enter into the initial conversation. Neurobar Weblord is not a great card in the arena, and the other two that we mentioned are class cards.
Hating on the Neurobar Weblord already. I like that card.
I know you definitely like it more than me, although you might be in the minority there compared with other.
I'll defend it in a
players.
bit. Go on with your hate on 1/4s.
1/4s always have this problem of just being annoying, but not annoying in the sense that like they're good annoying. Just it's tough to get rid of them on the turn that they come out, but they rarely offer you an advantage, right? So you have a 1/4 on turn 2. If it's going up against a 2/3 in the span of 2 turns, it's going to die and still leave behind that 2/1 body.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually gets not dominated, right? Because it needs 2 turns in order for it to die. However, if it's going up against a 3-2, we have the same situation, in which case, if you're facing against the ping class, then they are left with a 3-1. And we talked about how with the 2-3 against the 2-3, if they attack in and ping, we're fine with that. We're significantly less fine with a 3-1 than a 2-1. Because
that was the old 3-mana 3-drop killer, right? The
yes.
3 attack. So it's not as bad now, but yeah, it's still not good.
It's still not good. And that one extra attack that early on in the game can make a difference. It can definitely put you in a tough spot if you only have, like a 3-3 on turn 3. Then you basically just lost a card and you didn't gain any tempo at all. So that's the unfortunate part. But 1/4s are very annoying when they come down because it's very tough to get rid of them.
You can't get rid of them. They stay on the board. If you have a buff, so good, right? Like Mistress of Pain plus Demon Fire, done, game over. You even have like an abusive sergeant out, or if you can coin out a Dark Iron Dwarf. It just needs to survive, and it gets buffed, and it is amazing. And it's going to survive most likely. Why? Because it has 4 health, and nothing really deals 4 damage. What are you afraid of? Like a flame cannon? Like, no one's gonna flame cannon that. No one's gonna eviscerate that. You're not even gonna get heroic striked. Like, there's nothing. No one thinks of 1/4s as a threat, right? And that's an advantage because they get to stay on the board. They also trade evenly with 3/2s. They could ping, but once again, most 3-drops, right? You're afraid if you have a bad 3-drop, that's not very good. But if you have a good 3-drop, that's totally fine if your opponent anti-tempos to ping down the 1/4. Or if you're a ping class yourself, that's not that bad. You can just trade back with the ping. So for half of the drops you're going to see, which are 3/2s, you're fine. You're like doing just as well as a 3/2. Or a 2/3. For the other half, which is 2/3s, yeah, you're gonna need to back up. You wouldn't want to do this, so it's obviously not as good as a 2/3 or a 3/2. But I think it's underrated, just kind of across the board as on turn 2. And so I like all of the 1/4 drops, probably more than even our tier list rates it. Like Mistress of Pain, Narubar Weblord, Armor Smith. Those are all cards that I'll draft like a little bit higher than what the tier list says, because I see the combo potential in that. And they're also like the best 2/1 stoppers, right? They're the best like Argent Squire killers, and we raised Argent Squire on the tier list recently, so you're gonna see a little bit more of that in the arena meta. They're just tricky and annoying. And one more important thing, and this is probably more applicable in Warlock than other classes, but probably also Rogue or somewhere else. You care about your face. And the more defense your minion has, the less damage you will take to your face. I don't care if it's a 0 attack card. It will still end up dealing less damage to your face because your opponent has to spend attacks, maybe multiple attacks, to kill that thing if they want to. And your opponent's always kind of scared that you're going to buff it at some point with one of the cards, because you're going to have some buffs in your hand at some point, right? Like, imagine coining out a 1/4 and following it up with a Direwolf. Oh, pretty good now all of a sudden. So it's, I agree, it's not the best thing in the world, but it has its values. And if you don't play with 1/4s, if you just have a rule that it's like total trash, you're never gonna pick it, I suggest you like play around with it a bit, especially when you have some like buffs, like low costing buffs that you can really surprise your opponents with. They're really not that bad. And we talk about late game effects, right? 3/2 is the best, 2/3 is not so good. Well, 1/4s in theory could be worse, but at 4 health, even in the late game, you may be able to hit something twice, and then they're kind of the same as a 2/3, and they taunt more damage, which potentially leads your opponent to leave them alone, and then you get back to the whole buffing thing.
Right. And the whole nature of 1/4s, if you just look at what they do, they are very combo, right? We're not just talking about the body itself, in which if you get Shattered Sun or Dark Iron Dwarf on a 1/4, that's really good. We're talking about
Crazed Alk.
or just the Crazed Alk. But also the nature of the cards are very tricky themselves.
Yeah.
1/4 has a very unique effect. Mistress of Pain is a demon, a very good one. And if you can buff it, it has really good synergy with your hero power and just kind of
Even
all
if
the
you can't buff it,
yeah
you hit their face twice, or you hit a minion twice, and it gets the card back because it gives you 2 health.
yeah, definitely. And with the priest worm rest agent, if you have a dragon, then suddenly it becomes a 2/4 with taunt on turn 2. That is absolutely amazing.
Even not on turn 2, right? You have a 4 health taunt. That'll protect some stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So all of these cards by themselves, even if they were just a plain 1/4, they are pretty good for combos. And because of their just weird nature and their unique effects, it puts them like out of the arena.
The arena meta.
Yeah, the arena meta.
Like, they're expectation busters, right? The way we're talking about them, if your opponent does something weird, like play a 2/1 or something, you have a 1/4 in your hand, you laugh. You're like, game. That's game right there. But if your opponent plays normally, these are kind of subpar, like, half the time. And the other half, they kind of do their job like anything else. And 2/2s. Quick word on 2/2s before we move on. Just to set it up, 2/2s get killed by 2/3s pretty thoroughly. And they trade absolutely evenly with 3/2s, and they're just like any other card. It's kind of like the relationship between 1/4s and those cards, except 1/4s stay on the board, and 2/2s just get removed no matter what.
Yeah, I mean 2/2s are terrible. They die to one drops. No one is playing 1/2s. Like no one. This is why no one drafts Gold Char Footmans. Like everyone drafts 2/1s. So it's either going to die to basically any one drop, or it's going to die to 50% of two drops. Like just get completely dominated. So unless you're drafting Mad Scientist and you have a secret behind it, no one is happy.
Pint-sized summoner. So the good part about 2/2s is they're 2/2s for a reason, right?
Yeah.
They're missing a stat point for a reason. And if you need to put it down on turn 2, generally not the best time. You want to hold on to that card. It's probably Kobold or something, right? Or it's like a Frostwell Grunt and you want to like taunt it in it later. So you play 2/2s in response to a 3/2 if you need to. You don't affirmatively coin it out.
No, definitely not.
You only drop it on the board if you're a class desperate for tempo, like a Warlock, a Hunter, a Warrior, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it's a response card. Or if it's one of like two very specific cards, right? One is a Cut Purse and one is a Pint-sized Summoner, but they do the same thing. You put them out early because they're supposed to ramp you. And then even if they die, you've traded essentially a card for tempo. Which is what we've established. It's okay to do. It's okay to trade a very small card for tempo, because what's the point of a very small card? It's for tempo anyway.
Yep. So I think that summarizes 2/2s pretty well. Like situationally, some 2/2s could be pretty good with their effect, but if it's just a plain 2/2, if we're just looking at the stats, then you can easily see how it is bad.
Okay, moving on. Question from the GOAT. What is it? What's the GOAT asking us today?
So the GOAT is asking us this week, what was the most interesting interaction you had with someone after adding them post-match?
Most interesting interaction. Oh, I have a good one. This happened spring, and I was streaming, and we were doing a Confidence Warrior run, which I had just made up at the time, because I think like I made a misplay like the game before that, and chat was like really on me. But I was streaming, and I was like, all right, we're going to play Warrior, and it's a bad class, but that's okay, because I have confidence, and all the plays I make are going to be right, all the picks are going to be right, and we're going to go face a lot, we're just going to destroy everybody, because there's nothing they can do about it. It turned out to be like a slightly above average deck, but we ended up going 12 wins on the back of confidence, and chat got really into it too. So it was a really fun experience. And the last deck had a Fel Reaver, I think, that was played. And so we ended up milling this Paladin. Like, most of his deck was milled, and we got lethal. We didn't mill him to death, but we saw all of the cards that were milled. It was like, I don't know, Coghammers and like Muster for Battle, Shielded Mini, but just like all the great, amazing Paladin cards that you could possibly have. And we're like, oh my god, this is the best deck ever. And as soon as we were done with the game, like 2 minutes later when we were opening packs, he comes into chat and he says, hey, did I just face you, ADWCTA? And chat was like, oh my god, are you that Paladin? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, that was an amazing deck. I hope you are still in this and we did not just like knock you out of your 12-win dream. And he was like, yeah, I've never gotten 12 wins before. It's only my I've only been playing this game for a month. Seems like a really good deck. And we just spectated him, streamed it to our entire audience, and we followed him. And he was a little nervous at first, but he was good. At first, I think he was trying to listen to my commentary, and then we were like, no, there's a delay. Just like make your moves. You took this deck to 11-2. You can take it to 12 wins. He got his first 12 wins. It was an awesome experience. I had a ton of fun. I think everybody has a lot of fun. And it's actually on our YouTube. If you just search like 12-win Warrior, Confidence Warrior, and like go to the very end. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, that was a cool run. First, the Confidence Warrior run, where it all began. Back when the Warrior...
Oh, the best part about a Confidence Warrior is even when your hero dies before your opponent's hero, as long as one hero dies, you get a win. It really helps the win rate.
All right. So I guess mine would be, this is way back. This is kind of right when we started streaming. I think it was the week after our first Druid run where we stayed up until like 2 a.m. And no one saw it. I think maybe
so like more than a year ago. Yeah. We're going way back here.
Yeah. I faced someone. It was a Shaman versus Shaman matchup. And Shaman v Shaman matchups are always really interesting, right? Like Shamans are very unpredictable in what they can pull out on a certain turn. Very, very
annoying. RNG.
These are all.
Sorry. I meant fun.
Fun. Yes, fun. That's how Blizzard would describe it. We faced each other twice. So I got my 11th win and 12th win from him, and afterwards he
Oh,
added me, and I was expecting the typical kind of like either, "Hey, good game," and then that would be it, or the stuff you see on Reddit, where people just like go off on the other person. But
I
no,
wonder
it
how
was
much of that is made up. Those stuff on Reddit seems like so over the top, like meme generators.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of people in this world, but it ended up being a really cool experience. He said good game, and then we started talking about different plays.
Yeah.
I was really curious about like what he had in his hand afterwards. There was a certain turns where I was wondering if he was um, like trying to bait a lightning storm, and I asked him
Uh,
that, and we just analyzed the plays because we were both so focused in both of the games, and it ended up being extremely close both times.
yeah.
And we just talked about the plays, what he had in his hand, what
Nice.
I had in my hand, and it was just a very cool experience. And it kind of just really reinforced how intricate and like how strategy based the game really is. We were talking about like there was one point where he tried to like bluff something as well, and I kind of like fell into it, right? Where he set it up to kind of pretend like he had a turn 6 fire alley, and then I made my turn a little bit awkward to try to play around that. And we talked about it for an hour. It was just a very cool
Mhm.
experience. I don't think I ever talked to him again, but if you're out there, man, that was a good chat.
Note to self: if you have a long, deep conversation with Merps one night, he's not going to reach out to you again.
Hey, man,
He's not calling you back, not texting you back.
it was a magical night. Okay.
All right, so that's the question from the goat. As always, we have our Feed the Goat campaign going on. If you enjoy the content or any other content that we produce, and you would like to feed the goat to help us, go to patreon.com/grinninggoat and make a pledge. It's a monthly pledge, and it really helps us out. There's also some perks if you. I think they're mostly Twitch focused, but you get your name on stuff. We've adopted kind of like the gala method for it, where people contribute, and we give a little bit back, but just like a token. So because we really want it to be about feeding the goat and supporting us, and not about like we're trying to sell you something. So let's move on. Second half of the show. Card good bad. Okay, you pick this one, so you talk about this one. I'm gonna say right off, I don't like the card. I'm gonna say bad on this, but so card good bad is when we tell you whether the card is good or bad, and the card is Doomsayer. Merps go good or bad.
Actually, okay.
That
So,
is not a good card, good bad card. That is neither good nor bad.
well, we're getting quite a bit more nuance than card good bad. Um, but yeah, Doomsayer is a card in which, give you a little insight on our tier list talks, I have always been pushing, and I've been pushing for like almost a year now to have Doomsayer
This
just
card
like
started
bumped
at like
up.
a under a 20.
Yeah, start off under a 20 and add up to ultimately relented. The theory of Doomsayer is just it creates a very difficult situation for your opponents, even mid game and late game, in which you're behind. You can try to hide it behind a taunt as a way to come back. And on turn two, it's so incredibly strong. On turn two, like what is the strongest thing that they can put out on turn two? Probably just a 3-2, right? And
Yeah,
then
they're
you
not going to kill it if you play it on turn two.
yeah, it's such a strong turn two play because you play it on turn two, they have to pass their turn three. You essentially
Mm-hmm.
just make them waste 3 mana, and it's a 1-for-1 exchange as well. So they just go face with their 3-2 and say, "All right, you got me. That's it." There's nothing. There's almost nothing that they can do on turn three to kill off your Doomsayer with the addition
Whoa.
of the 3-2, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah, that sounds super OP. This is card good bad. Why is it not good? Why are we going with vaguely okay?
Once again, it's one of those cards where sometimes it just doesn't do anything, right? Where you're kind of even on the board, or if you're ahead, it does not help you win more. And when you guys
No,
are
it does not help you win more.
well, it can help you with the end BM, like you're about to
Yes,
win and then
it
boom,
is the best
Doomsayer,
BM.
hit him to the face. But I think the advantages of like what we talked about on turn two, plus the opportunities when you're behind to potentially grab the board back. I think it makes it better than what it is on the current tier list.
Okay. So I hate this card. I fight Merbs every step of the way. And, I'm not the only one that hates the card, and he's not the only one that likes the card, but I agree with him on the turn 2 analysis. It is one of the best cards on turn 2 that you could possibly play, and it is generally worthless afterwards. It basically reads as heal 7 health if you're not going to die this turn. Because you're not going to play it generally. Like, you're not playing this card if your opponent doesn't have 7 damage to deal to you. That's kind of a weird time to play this card. If your opponent has any charge minion, it's just going to die for free. So all it does in the late game, even on even when you're not up, even on a contested board, is it forces your opponent to waste some attacks on it, so you get set up, which is not nothing, but like it's a high price to pay for a card. And more important than that, its utility is RNG. Because what is more RNG than do you draw this card on turn 2? That is just rolling the dice. And I don't
fair.
like cards that are RNG because, if you're a good player, you want stuff that you're in control of because you know you can outplay your opponents with it. And Doomsayer seems like a pretty skill-based card, and it is in the later game, but its effect range is very small in the later game, and its effect range is very huge on turn 2, and it is not skill-based at all on turn 2. Your opponent's skill doesn't matter, your skill doesn't matter, it's just whether you draw it. And you're not likely to draw it. Your chances of drawing any one card by turn 2 in your deck is like absurdly low, right? It's like what, 25%, 20%?
Yeah, it's not high, but this is why it's not higher, right? Like I just want it higher. In no way do I think it's a great card, but and this is where we disagree, and it's part of the process that we use to determine the scores. I'll throw out my arguments. Adulta will throw out his arguments, and after many hours, we'll just settle on something. But
in a very highly scientific way,
extremely
by
scientific.
giving it to Merps' chinchillas and seeing which one his chinchillas crawl towards.
Yes. This is, you just gave away the entire Hearth Arena algorithm, basically.
I mean, just in case they don't trust us, who are we?
Fair enough.
And who doesn't trust chinchillas?
So, I have put out my argument for Doomsayer. Adukta has put out his argument. And this is one of those cards where I think, based on your playstyle and based on your experiences, you can agree with him, you can agree with me, and it's part of the beauty of Arena, right?
But yeah, try it out. Try it out. Like, if you've never played Doomsayer, first of all, you have not been BMing as well as you could have.
Definitely not.
The end is coming right before you end the game is the best. I don't even care if you concede afterwards. That's still the best BM. But more important than that, it's actually a very interesting card. I like it for the flavor. I just don't like it in my deck for my win rate. But play around with it. Maybe you'll agree with Mervs. Maybe you'll agree with me. It's definitely an interesting card. I suggest you pick it if it's like close in one of your drafts. And who knows? We may be moving it up later. I do know like several Infinite players are definitely on board with Merps on this, thinking it's like a fairly decent card.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Arena Coupe that's coming up after this in about 15 minutes, we are going to play a Warlock run, our first TGT Warlock. And actually, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Warlock. And there's actually big news with the Warlock, right, Merps? We did something last week when we figured out that we had to play Warlock in TGT.
We did something that we talked about doing for a long time, and we probably should have done earlier, but we're just, like you said, we're basically just two hamsters running on wheels all the time. We basically knocked down high drops, big minions in Warlock,
and spells.
And spells as well. And the stats back us up on this. When we went to look at Hearth Arena stats, we realized that Warlocks just do not do well with stuff that costs 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 mana. And it makes a lot of sense. The advantage of Warlock is their hero power. And their hero power does nothing to affect the board. In fact, you're killing yourself with the hero power. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to curve very aggressively. And that does two things. Number one, it gives you initiative, which is important for protecting your health. And number two, by steering the curve towards 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, it ensures that you curve out better. So you're always going to be able to fill in the curve with those 1s and 2s as well. and then you drop. You're able to tempo out these drops. Do that versus an opponent. You have the initiative, and then when you're running out of cards, that's when you start tapping and then start replenishing. And then you can either push face, you could switch the tempo, and just like with the tempo you have out on the board, kind of trade, and that's how you win as a warlock. So we've noticed, and it just makes so much sense.
It's not to say you can't win other ways. It's just saying that if you're winning the other ways, you're not using your hero power. It's like we give an edge to Hunter for cards with reach, because that's using the Hunter's hero power. You don't have to, right? It's not like we're giving them like a million points or anything, but it does affect it.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up the hunter because the idea is kind of the same, although the end result is very different. With the hunter, you want to use up your cards and just kind of push for face damage, right? So when you win, like during the mid game as a hunter, if you've been putting pressure and you're playing the aggressive style that you probably should be playing, you're going to have less cards than your opponent. But if you are in a better board state, able to put pressure on their face, then you're absolutely happy with that.
Because you can translate that into face damage. Like at any point, right? You have a board, you're like all happy. Instead of trading with his minions, you're like, all right, you have 2 minions, I have 2 minions. I'm putting 2 more minions out. I'm throwing my minions to your face. You're, on a 4-turn clock, and you have to remove all my minions. Go for it. Like, show me what you got.
And as the warlock as well, if you're in the mid game and you're like 1 or 2 cards behind, but you have the board, you're in a great position. You're highly favored to win because at that point you can just start gaining cards turn after turn, and they don't have the initiative. And unless they, board clear multiple times, you're just going to outcard them in the late game.
Right. And the reason we don't knock things down for Hunter and we knock things down for Warlock is because of the hero power, right? The Hunter is about damage to the face. The Warlock, you draw a card, and if you draw a card, you need to play the card, or you should play it. Otherwise, it's basically 1-turn delay tempo. And you can't play it all if you draw 2 cards and they're more than 8 mana. So when you start playing like these 5 drops, 6 drops, 7 drops, 10 drops, Krakens, you're not really going to, if you hero power and then you get a Kraken and the card that you had previously drawn was a 2 mana card, you're playing the 2 mana card, and for that 10 mana turn, you have only put out 2 mana's worth of tempo on the board. That's awful. I don't care how good the Kraken is for this late game. It's not as good as just a 5-drop. So it's going to be rated, it's going to be knocked down a bit. Kraken's kind of a special case. It's still pretty high in Warlock because it's just a ridiculous card. Yeah. But the hero power usage at that point is really going to skew the value of cards.
Definitely. And we did this previously with, in the opposite direction with classes like the Priest, in which we looked at the stats and we saw Priest just did horribly with low drops, like 1s especially. So we lowered that. Rogues did very well with small drops, like
combos.
Yeah, combos. And also Rogues are the top tempo class. So it makes sense that 1 drops would be good for them. And this was a necessary and really overdue change for Warlocks. And I think it really will make Hearth Arena more accurate when drafting Warlocks.
Yeah, I mean, when we go 12 wins tonight, you'll understand.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay, so I think that's it for today's episode of the Lightforge. Thank you guys for tuning in, and next week we are going to have a very special guest. He's been a member of the Arena community for longer than we have, and he runs a Twitch stream and does a lot of other stuff. A very good community guy, and we're going to talk to him about, because I know a lot of, I think the reason we're doing this, and we could, and we chose to invite, and this is Simcopter, by the way. I should probably say the name.
I was wondering when you were
Simcopter on next week. And we're picking Simcopter because he is one of the few players who have really taken his game to the next level record-wise since TGT has come out. And he's been playing this game forever. So and he was always an infinite player. So to go from something I don't know what his exact stats are, but to raise your win percentage by like a few, like even 1%, or like by 0.1 or 0.2 wins per run when you're already over 7 is a huge accomplishment. It's very difficult to do. And he's had a pretty big jump in TGT. So if you're wondering, maybe you have not improved in TGT as much as you'd like to, maybe you've actually taken a couple steps back, maybe you're just looking at how to like get ahead of the meta in a way that other people may not have picked up on, we just thought that, Simcopter was one of the guys that probably has figured this out more than anyone else in terms of what is different about TGT. And he's a great guy, so we're going to interview him for the next Lightforge. Tune in for that. And also, the next card Good Bad is going to be...
Oh, yes. What did we decide on?
I have no idea. That's why I shoved it to you.
I am completely drawing.
So it will be a total surprise, and we will definitely make it up before the next Lightforge. Or you know what? We're going to ask Simcopter. That's a way better solution. That's what we wanted to do all along. That's why we both forgot the card that we actually wanted to talk about. Because Simcopter will tell us the most important card to winning in the TGT meta.
Perfect.
Next week. So we'll see you then. Adwikta.
This is Merps.
Bye.
See ya.